As we all know, the UFC and MMA as a whole have weight classes for a reason.
I wanna fight with Brock Lesnar.
Declaring the winner by knockout, Brock Lesnar!
That being said, the UFC has come a long way since UFC 1, where weight classes were not even remotely close to being utilized. And don't get me wrong, it was bloody entertaining getting to see a skinny 180-pound middleweight Royce Gracie fight and beat a juice to the gills 220-pound Ken Shamrock. But times have definitely changed, and with the game evolving so much since that fight in 1993, and nowadays weight classes can make all the difference for a fighter's career when they find their perfect weight class. However, at the highest level, we have seen fighters test the waters at different weight classes, with it all going horribly wrong in an attempt to either find easier competition and renew their career, like Luke Rockhold moving from middleweight up to light heavyweight and finding out the hard way that he just isn't physically strong enough for the division and he couldn't deal with the light heavyweight power difference. And then even on the other end with TJ Dillashaw trying to claim a belt in a second division by cutting down to flyweight to face Henry Cejudo, draining himself completely to make weight to the point his chin was made out of fine china, which Henry Cejudo proved in 32 seconds. So moving weight class is always a risky move, but pessimism aside, there have been fighters on the flip side that have absolutely thrived by either moving up or down in weight class, capturing titles, going on crazy win streaks, and even finding newfound fame from the fans. And that's what we are here to see in this video, the top 5 weight class changes in UFC history that have completely changed these 5 fighters' careers for the better. So without further ado, let's get into it. And in at 5th place, we have none other than the thumbnail man himself, Joaquin Buckley. And Buckley goes on this list for clear and good reason, and would probably be your first thought for who's had the best weight class change in recent times. And in recent times, I think it is him. Buckley is literally 1 fight away from a welterweight title shot, which we never would have thought a title shot would be remotely close to being in arm's reach for him coming into the UFC as a middleweight. And in 2020, Buckley came into the UFC in middleweight in probably the worst way possible, thanks to good old big mouth Kevin Holland, kindly reminding Buckley to wipe the snot off of his face, and then proceeded to kindly KO him right after, which was just one middleweight Buckley meme we got to see. Let's not talk about what Chris Curtis handed him 8 fights later. And after that loss, it was just the last straw. Going 5-4 in middleweight and being close to being cut just wasn't it for Buckley. But granted, he did have the KO of the year against Impa Kasanganay after the Kevin Holland loss, so it wasn't all bad, but the Impa win did die off pretty quick after he got the shit kicked out of him by Nasruddin Imavov, and he got head kick KO'd by Alessio Deshirico as well. So he was on his way to become another Phil no hype and no chin horse. But after the Chris Curtis finish, Joaquin Buckley made the decision to move down to welterweight, and now he is a serious title challenger and looks borderline unstoppable at the moment. He is on a 6-fight win streak at welterweight as we speak, kicking it off with a head kick KO of his own against Andre Fialho, and then he beat Alex Morono in the same year, to then breaking into the top 15, taking out a no-fight IQ Vicente Luque, to then schooling one of the middleweight boogeymen Nursultan Ruzaboyev coming down to welterweight in his first ever co-main event, to then his 2 biggest wins to date, chinning Stephen Wonderboy Thompson badly, and then most recently in his first ever main event as the last card of the year last year, basically slicing Colby Covington's bloody face in half, putting blood everywhere, and out-muscling him completely to what would eventually have ended in a KO TKO finish for him if it wasn't for Colby Covington's bloody plot armor. So it's clear to say welterweight is definitely for Buckley, going from middleweight where he was getting out-muscled and he simply couldn't match the power there, to now being the one who out-muscled everyone and has the power advantage in welterweight. Definitely definitely the best divisional move in current times now, being 11-2 at welterweight compared to being 7-4 at middleweight overall in his career. Buckley might just be the welterweight champion in 2026, so definitely keep your eyes out for him. Now, looking at a soon-to-be Hall of Famer who wishes he could have done what Buckley did to Colby Covington, I can't not put Dustin the Diamond Poirier moving up from featherweight to lightweight in this list. The fact that Dustin Poirier went from being a guy who was 8-3 at featherweight, finishing off his career there getting murdered by Conor McGregor, to now being one of the biggest names in the sport without ever holding an undisputed title, literally translates to lightweight being a fantastic move for him. Poirier has gone 26-1 in his lightweight career as a whole, and 14-5-1 in the UFC, and almost all of those losses that you see are pretty much in title fights, or of course, in BMF fights. But we aren't here to shit on him. We are here to give him his praise in the lightweight division, and there is no better way to display that than him not only being a fighter to get revenge on Conor McGregor, but being the pivotal reason for him spiraling out of the sport after snapping his leg. It is seriously impressive the things that he has been able to do at lightweight since his move. And Poirier, don't get me wrong, still had the skill at featherweight, but he just cut too much weight for the division, which would disrupt his training. And his biggest highlight was literally McGregor chinning him, so it was really only up from there in that division. And in lightweight, he looks completely rejuvenated, has power in his hands, and can not only consistently fight in 5-round fights, he can fight in 5-round wars. This guy has put on some of the most entertaining performances that we have not only ever seen at lightweight, but in UFC history. Going to wars with Max Holloway and almost chinning him, to Dan Hooker, where you could literally hear every single strike bounce off both of their domes, to Justin Gaethje beating him to a pulp by the 4th round of their first fight, and most recently, Islam Makhachev, permanently scarring him for life, to then having incredible career moments which are hard to be topped by putting Khabib Nurmagomedov in the most danger he has ever been in with his guillotine attempt, to casually helping Conor McGregor get some sleep after one too many proper 12s, and then of course to add insult to damn injury, checking Conor's leg and snapping it, sending him away from the sport for good, getting the last laugh. Do I need to seriously say more? Poirier going from an unknown, malnourished featherweight to a certified legend in lightweight, easily one of the best division changes in UFC history. Now, moving into our top 3 and moving up from lightweight with Dustin Poirier, we are moving to welterweight to a very mediocre Robert Whittaker, who went 4-4 in his career in this division as a whole and going 3-2 in the UFC. Now, granted, he didn't come in too badly because he beat Brad Scott to become the Tough Smashers winner and then proceeded to chin fellow Tough winner Colton Smith in the 3rd round, but the positives were definitely short-lived, as he was outworked by Court McGee, outstruck, and then the smiling assassin Stephen Wonderboy Thompson folded him like a fucking lawn chair, which really cemented the fact that welterweight wasn't for him, and his chin could just better sustain damage at middleweight with an easier weight cut for him. And God, did it not only do that, moving to middleweight then put him on an 8-fight win streak, showing that he was able to sustain more damage, but most importantly, he had his technical striking and speed translate perfectly into the division, knocking out a legend in Jacare Souza, Derek, his own main event, and Brad Tavares brutally in 44 seconds. And all of this was in addition to becoming an undisputed UFC champion, beating the boogeyman Yoel Romero for the title, and then beating him again straight afterwards. It was only until a faster and more technical striker in Israel Adesanya to come along to actually be able to dethrone him, because aside from Adesanya, he was literally looking unstoppable. But even after losing to Adesanya the first time, and with him arguably actually beating him in their second fight, he then proceeded to beat Darren Till, beat Jared Cannonier, beat Kelvin Gastelum, and beat the breaks off of Marvin Vettori, and of course, absolutely murdered Ikram Aliskerov. And with this, the losses that he had are only to the very best in the division in Israel Adesanya, Dricus du Plessis, who's the current champion, and Khamzat Chimaev, who is going to be fighting for the title. So ultimately, comparing the 14-4 run that he went on in middleweight to the 4-4 run he went at welterweight, the change was definitely worth it. Now, in at number 2, we are going from the Brazilian McLovin to the absolute chat of a champion that has a name, and yes, it is Charles Oliveira, moving from featherweight to lightweight. And as we know, Charles Oliveira is one of the most beloved fighters in MMA and is seen by many as their lord and savior. But to many, before moving to lightweight, where he became the most entertaining champion in the division's history, he wasn't seen as anything special. He was this scrawny grappler who was extremely drawn out, missing weight 5 times at featherweight in the UFC, going 7-4 and just really not progressing anywhere. But then in 2017, after Oliveira lost to Paul Felder, which is the fight that just really determined his status as a fighter, being labeled as a quitter by the MMA community, Charles Oliveira just shut everyone up. He went on an absolute tear at lightweight, going on an 11-fight win streak across half a decade, finishing 10 of those fights, with Tony Ferguson being the only one to make it out alive. But after the dominant decision win and taking a few limbs home from Tony Ferguson, he then chinned Michael Chandler for the title, submitted Dustin Poirier in his first title defense, and then submitted Justin Gaethje in his second title defense even quicker. He just filled out so much in the division, having much more stamina to exercise that grappling that he does have, all while improving his Muay Thai leaps and bounds to the point where he was a finishing freak at lightweight. And in this time, he has gone 15-5-1 at lightweight, only losing to Jim Miller, Donald Cerrone, and Paul Felder earlier on in his career, which those guys were just simply more experienced at the time. But Charles, coming into his prime, he was only truly stopped by Islam Makhachev, and he was narrowly edged out by a decision by Arman Tsarukyan. But regardless of the results, Charles Oliveira moving up to lightweight made him not only one of the most successful and entertaining fighters in the sport, but the most loved in the community as well. And now finally at number 1, we have a guy who not only changes divisions to then become more successful in his career, he became one of, if not the most successful fighter in MMA history. And that's none other than Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson, who moved down from bantamweight into the flyweight division, where his record is untouchable. But looking all the way back in time to where he fought at bantamweight primarily on the regional scene and early into his UFC career, he was still fantastic overall, going 10-3 at bantamweight, beating a much bigger guy like Adriano Moraes in a trilogy at the end of his career, so the longevity there between either division was fantastic. But even more importantly at bantamweight was his first chance at a UFC title against the arguable and still bantamweight GOAT Dominick Cruz. This fight was a pivotal moment for Demetrious Johnson to shape his career, because he got dominated 50-45 in this fight. It was clear as day that earlier in his career, DJ was just way too small to fight with the MMA elite that the UFC had at 135 pounds. And thanks to Dominick Cruz giving him that realization, he made the best weight class change of all time. He then went on a 14-fight win streak at flyweight, dominating absolutely everyone he faced with some of the greatest finishes that you will ever see, submitting Kyoji Horiguchi with an armbar in the final second, securing the famous flying armbar against Ray Borg, and chinning guys like Henry Cejudo and Joseph Benavidez brutally. His game literally improved in every single discipline, as well as his athleticism, his speed, and his strength as well. In this run, he claimed the flyweight title in 2012 against Joseph Benavidez and defended it 11 times up until he fought Henry Cejudo the second time in 2018, where he lost a very razor-close split decision, which he arguably could have won anyway, and he just could have continued his streak even further. But regardless, it's clear to say that in the UFC especially, going from an undersized bantamweight going 2-1 to the best flyweight and arguably the best MMA fighter at 14-1 with double-digit title defenses, this is a no-brainer as the #1 spot. And with us just talking about Henry Cejudo being the one to stop Demetrius Johnson's legendary run, I highly recommend you check out my most recent MMA Melts video where I react to his argument with Jason Herzog over his most recent loss and how the refereeing should change in the future. It's a very interesting watch. I definitely highly recommend that. And there's also talks about UFC 314, UFC 315 in there as a bonus. And please like, comment, subscribe. It goes a long way for the channel, and I will catch you in the next one.